She walked past Nazi guards every single day. They had no idea who she really was. Warsaw, 1942. The streets smelled of smoke and fear. SS officers patrolled every corner, their boots echoing against cobblestones stained with history's darkest chapter. In this city of shadows, survival meant invisibility. But one teenage girl chose the opposite path. She walked directly into the lion's den, and for 2 years she played the most dangerous game imaginable. Her name was Irena Sendler, and by the time the Nazis discovered the truth, she had already won. The secret hidden in plain sight Irena was 29 when the war began, but she looked younger. Blonde hair, blue eyes, the kind of face that slipped through checkpoints without a second glance. She was a social worker before the occupation. She knew Warsaw's poor neighborhoods like the back of her hand, knew which families needed food, which children had no shoes, which doors opened to desperation. When the Nazis sealed the Warsaw Ghetto in November 1940, they trapped over 100,000 Jews inside 3 square miles of hell. Brick walls topped with barbed wire, armed guards at every gate. The official ration was 184 calories per day. Starvation became policy. Disease became weapon, and the world looked away. But Irena didn't look away. She obtained a permit from Warsaw's Epidemic Control Department, a legitimate document that allowed her to enter the ghetto to inspect sanitary conditions. The Germans were terrified of typhus spreading beyond the walls. They needed someone to monitor disease, someone they trusted, someone who looked like them. They handed her a pass without knowing they'd just armed their enemy. What she smuggled out the first time Irena smuggled a child out of the ghetto. Her hands shook so badly she could barely grip the ambulance door. The infant was sedated, hidden in a toolbox beneath wrenches and hammers. One cry at the checkpoint would mean execution. For her, for the driver, for the child, for the family who'd handed over their baby to a stranger with only desperate hope as collateral. The guard at the gate barely glanced inside the ambulance, waved them through. The baby-lived daughter Irena went back the next week, and the week after, and the week after that. She developed a system: infants in toolboxes, toddlers in potato sacks, older children sedated and hidden in ambulances marked with red crosses. She recruited a network, Catholic families who would take Jewish children, forge new papers, new names, new livestock. But here's what most people don't know. Irena never forgot who these children were. She wrote down their real names, their parents' names, their addresses, every single detail on tissue-thin paper, rolled tight and sealed in glass jars. She buried these jars in a neighbor's garden beneath an apple tree because she believed, against all evidence, against all logic, she believed that someday, somehow, these children might want to know who they really were. The double life nobody suspected B-Day. Irena was the helpful social worker. Cheerful, efficient. She carried medicine into the ghetto, brought food packages, checked for typhus. The SS guards learned her face, learned her routine. She became part of the landscape, invisible through familiarity. But inside the ghetto walls, she was someone else entirely. She worked with the Jewish resistance, coordinating escape routes. She moved through apartments where entire families huddled in rooms smaller than closets, where children with swollen bellies watched her with ancient eyes, where mothers whispered impossible questions. Will you take my child? Will you save them? The choice Irena offered was agony. Give up your child to strangers. Never know if they survived. Never hold them again. Or keep them close and watch them starve. Watch them disappear into the trains that left from Umschlagplatz. The trains that never came back. Most parents couldn't decide. How could they? Irena learned to make her pitch simple, brutal, honest. I don't know if I can save your child, but I know what happens if they stay. The numbers grew. 5 children, 10, 20, 50. She recruited more helpers. A network of nurses, drivers, volunteers. They used sewers, used ambulances, used courthouse connections. One judge issued hundreds of false birth certificates. One priest baptized Jewish children and recorded them in church registries. The machinery of rescue operated beneath the machinery of death. The moment everything almost ended. October 20, 1943, 3 a.m., the Gestapo kicked down Irena's door. They'd been watching her, noticed the patterns, the frequent ghetto visits, the unexplained absences. Someone had talked, or they'd gotten lucky. It didn't matter. They had her now, and they wanted names, addresses, the entire network. They took her to Polwiak prison, the place where Hope went to die. For 3 months they tortured her, broke her feet, broke her legs, beat her until she couldn't stand, couldn't walk, could barely breathe. They demanded the list, the names of the children, the families hiding them. Irena told them nothing. Think about that. 23 years old, alone in a cell, bones broken, every day bringing new pain, knowing that one name, just one, would make it stop. The Gestapo were experts. They knew how to break people, knew that everyone had a limit. Everyone talked eventually, except Irena never did. Her resistance network bribed a guard. On the morning of her scheduled execution, January 1944, her name appeared on the list of those already killed. Official stamp, official record. She was led to a forest where prisoners were shot. But the guard turned away, let her stumble into the trees, let her disappear. Irena Sendler was officially dead, which meant she could keep working. Asterisk the war within the war. People think World War II was about armies and tanks, about battlefields and strategy. But there was another war happening, quieter, more personal. It was fought in basements and attics, in split-second decisions at checkpoints, in the choice between safety and sacrifice. The Holocaust wasn't inevitable. It required participation, thousands of people making thousands of small choices, looking away, staying silent, following orders. The machinery of genocide needed human hands to turn its wheels, but it also needed only small acts of resistance to break down. Every child Irena saved was a gear thrown into that machine. Every false document was sabotage. Every Catholic family hiding a Jewish child was a small rebellion against the system. Designed to eliminate an entire people, the Nazis built an architecture of death. Bureaucracy and railroads and gas chambers, efficient, industrial, unstoppable. Except it was stopped. Not completely, not nearly enough, but thousands of times in thousands of ways, by thousands of people who refused to participate in the machinery. Irena was one. Her network was dozens, and across Europe there were thousands more. Diplomats issuing visas, farmers hiding refugees, soldiers looking the other way, each one a small crack in the system, each one proof that there was always a choice, the truth they discovered too late after the war. Irena dug up the jars. The names were safe intact. 2,500 children. That's how many she'd saved. More than any single person during the Holocaust. More than Schindler. More than Wallenberg. But most of those children had no family to return to. The parents who had handed them over. The grandparents. The aunts and uncles. The entire communities. Gone. Irena spent years trying to reunite children with survivors. Some found cousins, distant relatives. Most didn't. The children she'd saved had survived, but they'd also lost everything. New names, new families, new religions. Some were too young to remember being Jewish at all. She'd saved their lives, but couldn't save their identity, couldn't bring back their mothers, couldn't undo the trauma. The rescue had worked, but there was no happy ending, just survival. Just the brutal arithmetic of saved versus lost. Irena lived with that burden for 65 years after the war. Never sought recognition. Never wrote a book. Never gave interviews unless pressed. The communist government in Poland arrested her again in 1948 for resistance activities. She was branded an enemy of the state. Lost her pension. Lived in poverty. For decades, almost nobody knew what she'd done. Why she almost stayed forgotten. Here's the thing about heroes. We want them to be celebrated, want their stories told, want justice and recognition and happy endings. But history doesn't work that way. Irena lived in communist Poland for 45 years. The government suppressed stories of Polish resistance. minimized the Holocaust, controlled the narrative. Western historians focused on diplomats and soldiers, on famous names from neutral countries. The story of a Polish social worker didn't fit the narrative, wasn't dramatic enough, wasn't Western enough, and Irena herself refused to cooperate with the myth-making. She insisted she wasn't special, insisted she'd only done what anyone would do, insisted on sharing credit with the dozens of people in her network. When reporters called her a hero, she got angry. The opposite is true, she said. I could have done more. I am haunted by the thought that there were children I could have saved and didn't. In 1965, Israel recognized her as righteous among the nations. Few people noticed. In 1999, for American high school students researched her story for a history project. They were shocked she wasn't famous. They wrote a play about her life. It went viral before viral was a thing. Suddenly, at age 89, Irena was famous. She was nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize in 2007. She didn't win. Al Gore did for a documentary about climate change. She died a year later, at 98, in a Warsaw nursing home. The obituaries finally told her story, finally gave her the recognition she'd avoided her entire life. Asterisk. The one thing that made it possible. You want to know how a 29-year-old social worker fooled the SS for 2 years? How she walked past trained killers, smuggled thousands of children, survived torture, and kept her network secret? It wasn't cleverness. It wasn't luck. It was something simpler and more radical. She looked like them. That's the ugly truth. Irena could do what she did because she had blonde hair and blue eyes, because she spoke fluent German, because the Nazis looked at her and saw one of their own. Her privilege was her weapon. The system designed to elevate her, she used to destroy it from within. A Jewish woman couldn't have obtained those permits, couldn't have walked freely through checkpoints, couldn't have negotiated with SS officers. The very system that made her safe made others targets. And Irena understood that, used it, weaponized her own privilege against the people who'd given it to her. That's what makes her story uncomfortable. She was only able to save people because of the same racial ideology that demanded they be killed. The Nazis' blindness was her camouflage. Their assumptions were her shield. She exploited their evil to undermine it. And she did it for 2 years, every single day, knowing that one mistake would end everything. One suspicious guard, one crying child, one moment of bad luck. But she kept walking through those checkpoints, kept carrying her toolbox with its terrible cargo, kept looking SS officers in the eye and lying without flinching. What remains? There's a tree in Jerusalem with Irena's name on it, part of the Garden of the Righteous at Yad Vashem. And there are 2,500 people alive today because of her, and thousands more descended from those 2,500. Children, grandchildren, great-grandchildren, an entire family tree of people who exist because one woman refused to look away. But here's what haunts me about this story. Irena spent the rest of her life thinking about the children she didn't save, the ones who asked for help she couldn't give, the ones who stayed behind, the ones on the trains. She saved 2,500, and she considered it a failure, because there were 400,000 in the ghetto, because most of them died, because saving thousands wasn't enough when millions were being killed. That's the weight that rescuers carry, the impossible math, the question with no good answer. How much is enough? When do you stop? When does your own survival matter more than one more child? Irena never found the answer, never stopped feeling guilty, never forgave herself for being human. The SS never discovered her network, never learned about the jars, never understood how many children had slipped through their fingers while they watched. They had the power, the weapons, the system, but a blonde social worker with a briefcase beat them. Not completely, not even close, but enough times that it mattered, enough times that thousands of people are alive today. She fooled them for 2 years, and in those 2 years, she changed the ending for 2,500 families. She couldn't stop the Holocaust, couldn't save everyone, but she saved who she could. with broken feet and buried jars and a borrowed permit that said she was checking for disease. And she never stopped. Not until the war ended. Not until there was nobody left to save. She walked into that ghetto knowing each trip might be her last, knowing the Gestapo was watching, knowing her luck couldn't hold forever. But she went anyway, because those were children, because someone had to try, because the alternative was looking away. The girl who fooled the SS wasn't a girl at all. She was a woman who understood that evil wins when good people do nothing, who understood that her safety meant nothing if she used it only for herself, who turned her privilege into a weapon and her fear into fuel. She walked past those guards every single day. They never knew who she really was, and by the time they figured it out, it was too late. The children were gone. The jars were buried. The network had scattered. They'd lost. They just didn't know it yet. That's the real story. Not about fooling the SS, about refusing to be a bystander, about looking at impossible odds and trying anyway, about being ordinary until the moment when ordinary isn't enough, about becoming whoever you need to be to save one more child. Just one more. Irena Sendler saved 2,500 children, but she taught us something more important. That courage isn't fearlessness. It's fear doing the right thing anyway. That heroism isn't about being special. It's about making the choice that terrifies you because someone's life depends on it. She was a social worker with a permit, and she was the SS's worst nightmare. They never saw her coming, and by the time they did, she'd already rewritten the ending for thousands of people. That's who she was. That's what she did. And that's why we remember her name.